You guys are very, very fortunate. And it feels different being on this side of the room than being in the benches. And I'm here to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. It's about leadership and diversity. And I wrote my book, a memoir, about my experience as the first female student to attend an all-male high school on a full-time basis in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. And that experience has taught me a lot about diversity and inclusion and leadership. So I heard a bit of the introductions, but I'm sure your story, even though mine is very unique, you can find your story in my story. Because oftentimes we're in environments where we are the lone person. You don't look like me or sound like me. You're probably going into a new company or a new position, and a lot of the team is already established, and you just don't know how to navigate that system. I had to learn to navigate a system with 600 plus hormonal boys. And I started off as this young lady. This picture, we didn't have iPhones back then, so bear with the quality. This picture was when I was about 14 years old. And I was bright, but I was very timid and unsure of myself. And that's how a lot of people may feel when they're in environments that are different from theirs. When you think of diversity, you probably think of race and sexual orientation and gender. In my situation, obviously, the difference was the gender difference. Despite my lack of knowledge, despite my inefficiency and not knowing anything about diversity, there was an article written about me 6 months after I attended this school. And the article quotes me talking about how uncomfortable I was. But at the same time, within 6 months, they appointed me as a prefect, which is a position they don't often give to most of the students. This is a position that you actually have to be in a leadership qualities to be appointed a prefect. And so I've discovered that some of the tools that young girl used to get through a system that's not like hers and be embedded in it and lead within 6 months are the same tools that I use to this day. That's how I've navigated my career. I use the same structure and the same framework over and over again. And I'll tell you a story about why I actually wrote this particular book. I was having a conversation with my daughter, and she was about my age back then, about 14, and we were talking about her future. And she said, "Mom, I don't know if I can go to college. I don't know if I can do it because you've done such great things. You've went to an all-boys school. You went to Tepper. How am I going to be able to successfully do all of that?" And then it dawned on me, I never even told my own daughter this story. I never explained to her what it meant to be in an environment like that and succeed. And that's what prompted me to write the story. For 3 reasons. It was for her and for people who I felt needed to hear that message, male or female. The second reason was my principal at the time felt that it was important that I share that story because it's history. I was the very first female student ever to attend an all-male high school on a full-time basis, ever. So the story is not mine. It belongs to the school. It belongs to the country. And proceeds of my sales goes right back to the schools, to actually both my boys' school that I attended and the all-female school that I attended. And the third reason was for people like you who often ask me 3 questions. Why did you go? What was it like? And what did you learn? And the last part I discovered, even though I wrote the book as a memoir to answer those 3 questions, as I've been exploring audiences in New York, Toronto, here in Pittsburgh, I've been asked deeper and deeper questions, but how did you actually survive? How did you actually do that? We want to know. We want to understand how that happens. And so I've discovered there's actually a framework that I was following. I didn't know it was a framework back then. Trust me, I had no clue. I sort of just learned as I went along, made my mistakes. And from making mistakes and learning and growing, I've discovered there's a framework. And recently, I was invited to a roundtable discussion in New York with 20 or so other executives by Princess Beatrice of York. That's Princess Beatrice of York, Queen Victoria's granddaughter. And she invited just about 20 or 30 individuals, mostly women, to talk about the gender diversity gap that still exists and how we can pay it forward. And we've discovered that there are a couple of things, a couple of themes that exist and structures that exist that companies should be paying attention to in order to address that issue. And I believe there are things that corporations can do and individuals to help narrow that gap. There has to be a push from both sides. And recently, I read an article this year in the Wall Street Journal. In 2015, the women and people of color constituted 36% of board positions, but they only held 28% of executive positions. So we still have a gap. In 2017, there was a 2017 S&P labor statistic that said women, in particular, make up 52% of the professional labor force. That means there are more women in professional jobs than men. But in executive positions, we only hold 25%. There's still a gap. And that's what Princess Beatrice and the executives around the table were there to discuss. And we came away with 3 main things that corporations need to do in order to address that gap. And the gap is not just, I believe that the things that we can do for women are very similar to people of color and other diverse groups as well. The first thing is access. And I'll use my example from my boys' school. When I wanted to do physics, when I wanted to advance my education, and in your example would be your career, no one gave me access freely. My mother was the one who instigated that for me. So I had someone who stood up for me and said she needs access to this education. I was the only female student that qualified for physics at the girls' school. And they said, well, you're just one student, we're not going to teach you. So you're going to have to forget physics. If I did not do physics, that meant I was not going to get into higher education. And I would probably never have been a Tepper either. So a lot of things hinged on the ability for me to have access to the right education. But my mother, when she went to the boys' school to sign me up for part-time classes, because she thought, well, she can't go full-time, but she could do part-time classes here, they said, well, no, she can't. Our timetable is a 6-day rotating timetable, and the girls' school was a 5-day standard timetable. So for me to coordinate classes, there was just no way. But my mother stood up in the office, and she did like this. Why can't she come here full time? And everybody froze, including me. I was like, what did she just say? I don't think she understood what she said. And I'll explain a little bit about this school for you to understand what she was really asking for was for me to have access to one of the top schools in the country. This particular school is where the very first prime minister graduated from. In order to attend that school, you had to take an exam and be in the top 10% to be enrolled in that program. That's a picture of the school. It's a historic school. It's one of the oldest schools on the island. My mother was standing and saying, give her access to what the boys have. Give her access. And I've found in my career that for women and people of color or any diverse group, you have to give us access. And that's the same discussion we had around that round table. Unless you open the doors and give us a seat at the table, we're not going to be able to narrow that gap. You need to provide us with access. The second thing that we talked about was education and socialization. This is another view of the school. That's the courtyard. When I attended that boys' school, my very first class, one of my very first physics classes, I'm sitting in class, the teacher walks in, and he says, we're going to test you guys today. And one of the boys put his hand up, and he's like, is this test going towards our final grade? And the teacher said yes, and he's like, well, no, you're not testing us today, because this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't test our ability. If this is a pop-up test, you're not going to test us. And he packed up his stuff and walked out the classroom, and the rest of the class with him. And I was sitting there like, what just happened? Oh my God. And so that was the first time I realized the boys were taught and groomed differently from how I was taught and groomed. And this is not just in my environment in Trinidad. I've talked with girls here, females here, even at the round table, that women are taught to follow the rules, pay attention, take your test, be a good girl, don't raise your voice, be nice, right? The boys were taught how to think. We were taught what to think. And so when women in corporate environments tend to speak up, we're told we're bossy or we're too aggressive, even though we show the same qualities of being assertive. So we have to be careful when establishing organizations that you socialize women differently and that you think about, why am I thinking of her as bossy and aggressive when you wouldn't think of a guy who said the very same thing in that same way, right? I'm being very down to earth and being honest with you about what conversations have taken place in my arena. And just imagine, that's a picture of the boys in the courtyard, of being in an environment where the boys think differently, operate differently. They didn't just challenge in the classroom. In the courtyard, I would find them debating their teachers about what shoes they're wearing, whether they should be wearing the white or the black, and they have these debates going on. I'm like, OMG, I never had that. And so women in particular, I think we need that type of socialization and the ability to say, we want to challenge and we can challenge. They've created a monster in me, so that's why I tend to be more of the assertive and bossy type, but it has taken me further in my career than just sitting and taking whatever someone says to me as their word, right? The last thing that they focused on at the round table was male allies. So male allies are necessary. And I'm speaking specifically about gender identity, gender inequality. But at that round table, one of the men mentioned that women tend to self-disclose. When we'd send an email, we'd respond with, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to send this with that in the middle there. I put about, I meant a lot, and it was a typo. And they're like, we don't do that. You see, you're shaking your head. That's the same thing we did at the round table. All the women around the table, executives from American Express and Adobe, and very senior women were all shaking their head. Oh yeah, we do that. We do. I still do it too. I still make that mistake. But without the male allies around us to show us and tell us, hey, you don't really need to do that, it's kind of difficult for us to know where we're falling short. So having a male ally network is also key for your organizations if you're going to set up a system of a well-diverse workforce. I was sitting on a panel at Mellon Bank, and there was a male ally, and he impressed me so much. The things that he instituted, because he would say things like, you can't have a meeting at 7:30 in the morning. He used to have this team meeting at 7:30, and then he realized, wait, that's when most mothers are dropping their kids off at school. I shouldn't have a team meeting then. And there's different things that male allies can do that can support a structure where women are more welcomed and make it easier for us to lead and to manage. So those are the three things that I would say would definitely make an impact in any organization, even in your own personal life, is giving access, socializing differently, and creating a male ally network, a male ally system. So let's talk about the individual things that you can do. Because I'm a consultant, and I recently started a new engagement in August. And when I started the engagement, everyone in the team would pull me aside. Hazel, you have to work with this executive, and he's really mean. He's made a lot of the women cry. It's going to be hard. Just be careful. Just know it's going to be hard, okay? A couple of them have wanted to leave the team. It's going to be hard. I was like, okay. Within 2 months, that same executive said to me, Hazel, I've learned something from you. Why was he more comfortable at an executive that's with over 25 years of experience? Why was he more comfortable talking to me and disclosing that he actually learned something when other people were intimidated by him? It's because of my framework. It's not because those other women are not intelligent or they're not savvy. They just didn't use the same framework I did. And that's what I want to talk to you about. The framework for success, and it's not, and like every framework, there are layers. So there are 3 layers to this framework. And this is what I was using at the boys' school. I didn't realize it then, but after having, like I said, talked to all these audiences, I've been able to put it together into this neat framework. The first part is mastering your domain. That's the foundational layer. The second is becoming a peer, and then leading. And you kind of need to do these things in stages. And there are some distinct things that you do in each of these layers. So the first, mastering your domain, be you, adapt, maintain a safe distance, and manage your comfort zones. And I still use this layer daily. I use this all the time. The second is learn and engage, and then the third is to laugh and teach. And I've made it very, very simple for a reason, because when you read all the business school books and stuff that I've read when I was at Burr and everything, when you congeal all of that and you put it all together, they're basically all saying the same things. And it's basically very similar to what I've put together here. So I'll focus on the foundational layer today, because in the interest of time. And these are the 4 things that I mentioned. Be you. Being you is critical. Adapting, learning how to adapt, maintaining a safe distance, especially for women, and managing your comfort zones. And I'll talk to you about that in more detail. Being you is not that simple. It's not that straightforward. It's not just a cliche either. It's not easy being yourself in an environment where you're not like yourself, where there are not other people like you. So what you need to do is you need to be able to understand your own qualities and what you want to be known for. And I'm sure you probably heard the terminology about branding. It's similar to branding. Know who you are and who you want to be known for. And be sure to be consistent and continually repeat that message everywhere you go, whether it's the boardroom, whether it's the bathroom, or whether it's the bar. Be consistent and share your message and your brand over and over again. The second part is adapting. Adapting does not mean conforming. Adapting does not mean conforming. And you cannot really adapt well unless you understand that first step really well, being you. I've seen people who try to become other people in their environments just because it's easier, and it doesn't work well. And you lose respect, and then your voice is not heard. You're not going to be as efficient and as impactful. For me, in that executive example, a lot of people would try to do things they think he wanted them to do, or whatever he wanted to hear. I didn't. I said what I knew I wanted to say and how I wanted to present it, and I gave him the message he needed to hear. But I adapted it to his language. I communicated with him in the way he understood. So I first had to make micro changes. I had to pay attention to him. I had to listen to him and then realize, oh, he likes sports. He likes talking about baseball. So a lot of my conversations, when I spoke to him and communicated, were along the lines of baseball. And he heard me better that way. And it's because I adapted to his style of communicating. And I did have to take some risk. I had to ask him, what he likes or what he does on the weekend and things like that. And that was okay. But I had to adapt to his way of doing things, not without changing my own core belief, not without changing my core system. And that built trust and acceptance between us over time. So as an individual, wherever you are, whether it's your gender or your sexual orientation, whatever, you can find ways to communicate with people in the rest of your environment by just listening and adapting. The other thing, and this one is more difficult for me to explain because it's more of an art and a science than anything else, and it's maintaining a safe distance. Maintaining a safe distance doesn't mean I don't want to talk to you, stay away from me, and I'm just going to be here by myself. It actually is the opposite. It's actually trying to find creative ways to allow people into your world, into your space. And as a leader, you want to be approachable. You want to be able to have people approach you. So let them in, but you just let them know how far they can go. You don't want to be talking too much intimate stuff, but you want to be close enough that they feel close to you. And that is what kind of keeps the distance safe, because they understand your boundaries. They know where to go and where not to go. And it makes it easier for them to communicate with you. For that executive, I think he knew how easily he can talk to me and where he can talk to me and how much he can talk to me, because I made it easy for him. I made it easy to help him understand these are your boundaries and here's how we're going to operate. And we operated in those boundaries over and over again. And that's something you'd want to do as a leader, is being able to let others in and understanding how to keep that distance around you. The last piece of this framework on the last layer is managing your comfort zones. I use this all the time, managing my comfort zones. And this may be a little bit more tricky to explain, but I am not easily offended. And I say that because I see, in particular for women, I'm sorry, but this is going to have to be a down-to-earth discussion. We tend to get offended about something someone said more easily. And I feel that it's something that we need to manage and ensure that we're not trying to be too sensitive to issues. In that boys' school experience, they tried everything to rattle my feathers and to let me give up. And I didn't let them. I stood my ground, and if I was uncomfortable, I would stay when I was uncomfortable, but I would always find myself a safe space to go to to let my hair down and let my energy out and not let them know that that's, you can't keep doing me that. But what ended up happening was by me not responding to everything, they stopped. They just gave up. They realized, oh, we can't get to Hazel. We can't do her anything, and she's going to be offended. And it may not necessarily equate exactly in your corporate life, but I've seen situations in my own working environment, like that example with that executive, where women were so offended and so hurt that they wanted to give up, and they just let it get to them. Don't let it get to you. Don't let it get to you. And if it does, find a safe place to let it out and be okay with that. Be okay with being uncomfortable, because we're going to be different and it's going to be uncomfortable for a while. But eventually, you'll learn to manage that filter and you'll be more and more comfortable in your space and in your surroundings. So those are the 4 things. And because I know I'm at CMU, you guys have homework. You guys have homework. And the homework is for you, as you establish your corporations or as you function in your corporations, think about those 3 things that I mentioned that we talked about at the round table. How you can sponsor someone in a minority or female, or someone in a diverse group that's a smaller percentage. And reframe how you socialize, how you think about others. And create a network, a male ally network for your people in your organizations. It will help narrow that gap. And as an individual, I want you to think about what you can do to brand yourself. Find that one unique quality about you that you want to be known for. And adapt. Learn about a new way of communicating. Find somewhere that's not typically the way you'd like to communicate and learn more about it and adapt. Just do it once and see what happens. And of course, with your comfort zones, just keep that comfort zone close. Find that safe place because you're going to need it. It's not always going to be easy, but you can find that safe comfort zone. So that's my talk on how you can help diversity and leadership in your organizations. Questions? I always like questions, by the way, because that's how I came up with the framework to begin with, because people ask me questions over and over and over again. So feel free to ask me anything about any of the... Yes? Yeah, so most of the time it's about communicating. And I found that you have to know the environment. Like I said, you have to be observant. And over again, I'm finding it's the same style of communicating that it's a way of communicating that needs to change. So it's the most of the time I found it's around sports. I don't know why America is so sport-centric, but it's sport-centric. A lot of the times I found it's when I change the language. So I may say something like, that was a home run idea. That's those things sound very quirkish and silly, but they actually helped someone understand, oh, she understands my perspective. It's not something, and this is why I'm saying the framework is an art and a science, because it's not something I could just tell you now off the cuff, because you kind of have to know the environment to adapt to it. But most times it's a communication style. Does that help? Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned this a little bit, and maybe this is sort of really from my perspective.
Yes.
Sort of what makes a good male ally?
Yeah.
Can I think about that as my role? And
Yeah. Yes, and that executive that sat on the panel, he said a couple of things. He said, you need to be a good male ally, you need to understand the female perspective. And like he mentioned, he didn't realize that he was having meetings at a time when most women are putting their kids on the bus. He had another female executive who told him, so you have to be a listener. You have to be a listener. You have to be open to hearing from them that say, when they say no, and not think that they're not participating because they're not a good worker. It's just there's a part of their lives that they have to adjust to. So being a good listener and being comfortable with standing up in the midst of other men and saying, hey, we shouldn't talk about this person that way. Why don't we consider her for the position versus him? When they put 6 candidates before you to select for a position, make sure you say at least one of them has to be a female or 2. And he insists on any meeting that he's having that he has at least 2 females in the room. He's insisting that that's part of his organization. Absolutely, he has to have minimum 2 women in the room with him. And he's comfortable with doing that. So being a good ally is being a good listener and just being firm and understanding the issues. Does that help? Mm-hmm.
What prevents very intelligent women from reaching that work? Is it that corporate America is sexist, or is it something else?
Well, I can't answer for every woman, obviously, but it's what I had mentioned in the talk. It's really socialization and access. I think we just not provide access. There was, when the over 100 women were elected into Congress last year, I think it was Sheila Walsh that said, women won because women ran. And it's because we felt empowered. We felt we had been given access to do that. And so that's what ended up having a greater influx of women in leadership in Congress. It's the same with the workforce. If you give us access, we will succeed. Sometimes women we're overlooked if we may have 50%, 60% of the qualifications. A man may have the same set of qualifications, but you probably take a chance on him and not her. And I'm sorry, but that's what happens, and we need to be mindful of that and make sure that you give us opportunity. So I can't say as an individual why someone else wouldn't succeed. I know, for the example with that executive that I mentioned, why I succeeded and the others didn't. And because I've heard them complain about him, they were afraid of him, didn't know how to approach him, they were sensitive about everything he said. Those things never bothered me. And I saw myself as his equal. And I treated him as an equal. And giving him his respect, of course, but I wasn't intimidated by him as they were. So for me, that helped me reach him better than another executive.
Does it all boil down to communication? Access is a form of, if you think you don't have access, that's a form of miscommunication. I don't understand why I don't have access to this place. So I think, is that true?
No, access is more sponsorship to me. Like I said, with the male allies, it's...
Find a sponsor if you don't communicate.
Well, because your sponsor, you really can't find a sponsor. The sponsors find you. And I've had people who will say to me, Hazel, we want you to be in this position. We want you. I had no clue they were thinking of me for that position. But because I was leading and doing my own thing in other places, I was noticed. And then they took me and said, here, we want you over here. Come, we want to put you in this position. And so lead where you are. Do your own, be you, and function in your zone. And that propels you into other opportunities. Because if I'm just going to be a follower and just listen to what everybody tells me to do, just like everybody else, and I'm not doing it to get noticed, by the way. I'm doing it because that's really who I am. I'm just the type of person that I need to challenge and say, why are we doing this way? It's not efficient. It's not effective. Let's change it. Let's think about doing it differently. And that's probably from my Tepper days. It really is. Tepper spoiled me. So it's a combination of Tepper and that boys' school experience that I tend to rethink things and how you approach a problem. And executives and organizations need that type of thinking, because otherwise everybody's doing the same thing over and over, the same way over and over and over, right? So leading where you are, to me, that gets you sponsored. That gets you noticed, and you move forward that way. Yep.
Sometimes it's not always the men that are in the way. It's
The women, yes, I agree with that.
So I'm sure you've dealt with that
Yes.
in your career, and how did you navigate that?
I usually end up just taking myself away from those women and moving to a different area and doing what I need to do, and not being catty about it, not being, oh, I'll just keep doing my own thing. I'll always just be me. I'm always just doing my own thing. And what ends up happening is I'll move to a new area, and I'll have male or females who sponsor me because they recognize the value of what I'm offering. I don't really, like I said, with my comfort zone, I don't get easily offended by male or females. I just don't let them get to me. And they do, but I take it away from them, and I take that somewhere else. That's the safe place I'm talking about. Another female or somebody else at home or whatever, but I don't let that ever show up in the workplace. Yes.
I know your company is not that old, but
Right.
I was wondering what challenges you faced so far with owning your own company.
Owning my own company is the challenge, especially in Pittsburgh, is I'm a black woman. I'm just going to be down to earth about that. I'm a black woman, and again, access, right? So now I'm a consultant. I have to create my own network. I don't have a company of executives who can open doors for me in a position in a company. I have to go find positions for other people and for myself. And so the biggest hurdle is just knowing the right people. And again, that's the access problem, right? I've been fortunate, though, that I can meet the right people so far, and I'm having the right conversations. Yeah.
So going off of that, are you a part of any Pittsburgh organizations or national organizations that
Yeah.
help with networking like that?
I'm part of the Black MBA program. I'm also on the Pittsburgh Technology Council, the Tech Council, yeah. And I do a lot of work in the Caribbean as well, so I have a network in the Caribbean. So, any other questions? These are great questions. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you for having me. Yeah. Is it? Good. I'm glad it helped. Thank you.